Why starting to improvise is not what people think. When adults hear the phrase start improvising, their mind immediately jumps to a very specific image. They imagine long solos, fast phrases, complex harmony, complete freedom, confidence in every note. And because of this image, many adults immediately think that can't happen in 8 weeks. They are right, but that is not what starting to improvise actually means. This misunderstanding is one of the biggest problems in adult music education. Because when people believe that improvisation means mastery, they delay the beginning forever. They think, I need more scale, I need more theory, I need more technique, I need more time. So they wait and wait and wait. Years pass, sometimes decades, but improvisation was never meant to begin with mastery. Improvisation begins with a threshold, a moment where something fundamental changes inside the musician, not externally, internally. Before this threshold, the player cannot improvise at all. After this threshold, the player can begin to improvise, slowly, simply, imperfectly, but genuinely. This threshold is what most adult players never cross. Not because they are incapable, but because no one explains what the threshold actually is. So let's be very clear. Starting to improvise does not mean sounding like a professional, playing fast, knowing every scale, being confident all the time, never getting lost. Start to improvise means you can create simple melodic ideas. You can respond to harmony emotionally. You can continue even after a mistake. You are no longer frozen. You feel that music is coming from you, not from memory. This is a profound shift. It is the difference between repeating and creating, between executing and expressing, between fear and curiosity. And this shift does not require years. It requires the right sequence. The first 6, 8 weeks are not about depth. They are about access. Access to your ear, access to your intuition, access to melodic direction, access to emotional response. Once this access exists, everything else grows faster. But without this access, nothing truly begins, no matter how long you study. That is why some adults play for 10 years and still cannot improvise, and others unlock improvisation in a matter of weeks, not because they are better, but because they crossed the threshold. This video is about that threshold. What it is, why it exists, what changed inside you, and why the first 6 and 8 weeks matter more than most people realize. Before the improvisation threshold, most adult saxophone players share the same experience. They put on a backing track, they know the key, they know the scale, they even know a few patterns. But when it's time to play, nothing happens. Or something happens, but it feels wrong, disconnected, mechanical, empty. And after a few seconds, the mind takes over. What should I play? What scale is this? That note sounded bad. I'm lost. I don't know where to go. This is not a technical problem. It is a state problem. Before the threshold, the adult brain is in control mode. Control mode means analysis, judgment, anticipation, fear of mistake, fear of silence. Improvisation cannot exist in this state. Not because you lack information, but because creativity is neurologically suppressed when the brain feels unsafe. Adults don't freeze because they don't know notes. They freeze because their nervous system does not yet trust the improvisation process. So the first weeks are not about adding more content. They are about changing the internal state from control to exploration. This is the real shift. When this shift happens, something subtle but powerful occurs. You stop asking what is correct and you start asking what happens if. That single change is the beginning of improvisation. Curiosity replaces fear. Movement replaces paralysis. Sound replaces silence. This is why the threshold can happen early. Because it is not about skill accumulation. It is about permission and structure. Permission to begin, structure to not get lost. Once adults feel both, improvisation becomes possible. Not perfect, not fluent, but real. What actually changed in the first 6-8 weeks? So what really changed when an adult crosses the improvisation threshold? The change is not dramatic, it is subtle, but it is irreversible. Here are the core shifts. 1. You stop freezing at silence. Before, silence felt threatening. Now, silence feels like space. You are no longer afraid of the moment before the first note. 2. You trust your ear more than your memory. Before, you searched for information. Now you listen for direction. You follow sound, not diagrams. 3. You can continue after imperfection. Before, one wrong note stopped everything. Now it becomes part of the phrase. This alone changed everything. 4. You feel melody as movement. Before, notes were isolated. Now, phrase moves somewhere. Up, down, forward, home. 5. Improvisation feels human, not mechanical. Before, it felt like a test. Now it feels like a conversation. These changes do not mean mastery. They mean access. And access is the hardest part. Because once access exists, development accelerates. This is why the rest of the year is not about fixing students. It's about deepening what already exists. Defining tone, expanding melodic language, understanding harmony more deeply, improving rhythm and phrasing, developing identity. But all of that depends on crossing the first threshold. And this threshold is what makes the promise of starting to improvise in up 8 weeks honest, realistic, and achievable. Because starting is not finishing. Starting is opening the door. Why everything grows faster after the threshold? Once an adult crosses the improvisation threshold, learning changes completely. Before the threshold, everything feels heavy. After the threshold, everything feels lighter. Why? Because the brain is no longer fighting creativity. Practice becomes exploration. Theory becomes explanation. Technique becomes expression. Instead of asking, why can't I improvise? The student asks, how can I say more? This is the moment where progress becomes sustainable. Not rushed, not forced, but continuous. This is why a 1 year structure makes sense. The first weeks opens the door. The rest of the year builds the house. Without the door, the house is irrelevant. With the door open, everything has meaning. Why time and practice alone do not create improvisers? One of the most painful beliefs adult musicians carry is this one. If I just practice long enough, improvisation will eventually appear. This belief sounds reasonable, logical, responsible. And yet, it is one of the main reasons so many adult saxophone players remain stuck for years. Because time alone does not guarantee transformation. Practicing the wrong way for 10 years does not magically become the right way on the year 11. This is difficult to accept, especially for adults. Adults are trained to believe that effort equals progress, that consistency automatically leads to results, that discipline will eventually solve everything. But music, especially improvisation, do not work like a factory process. Improvisation is not cumulative in the way technical skills are. You can accumulate finger speed, scale knowledge, theory information, repertoire, but improvisation is not an accumulation. It is an integration. And integration does not happen just because time passes. It happens when the right elements meet the right order inside the nervous system. This is why two adult players can practice the same amount for the same number of years and end up in completely different places. One still freezes at the first note. The other can create, respond, and continue even when things are imperfect. The difference is not dedication. It is not intelligence. It's not talent. It is sequence. Improvisation emerges when learning follows the natural order of how humans create music. But most adult learning reverse that order. It begins with theory, rules, correctness, analysis, and only later, sometime much later, does it attempt to introduce expression. This inversion creates confusion, because by the time expression is introduced, fear has already settled in. Judgment has already formed. Self-monitoring has already taken control. So the student practices more and more, but always inside the same internal state. And that state cannot generate improvisation. This is why so many adult players say, I practice every week, but nothing changes. What they really mean is, my internal relationship with music has not changed, because improvisation does not respond to quantity, it responds to condition. And the most important condition is safety. The nervous system must feel safe to explore. Without safety, the brain chooses control, and control kills improvisation. This is why some people practice alone for years without crossing the threshold. They never change the internal environment in which they practice. They repeat the same pattern inside the same state with the same expectation and the same fears. Time passes, effort accumulates, but the threshold remains untouched. This is not a failure of character. This is a failure of design. Improvisation requires a learning environment that invites curiosity before demanding performance. Improvisation is invisible from the inside. When you are playing alone, you cannot fully hear what is happening. You hear intention but not result. You feel effort but not clarity. This is one of the great paradoxes of adult learning. The more intelligent and self-aware you are, the harder it becomes to access yourself objectively, because your mind fills the gap. It justifies, it explains, it compensates. This is why guidance is not about information. It is about perspective. An external ear can hear things you cannot hear yet. Not to judge, but to orient. Feedback does not exist to correct you. It exists to shorten the path. When adults try to improvise alone, they often reinforce the very habits that keep them stuck. Not because they are careless, but because the brain defaults to familiarity. Without guidance, practice becomes repetition of the known. Improvisation requires expansion into the unknown. This expansion is uncomfortable at first. It feels exposed, uncertain, vulnerable, and without someone holding the structure, most adults retreat back into safety. Guidance provides a container, a place where exploration does not feel reckless. Feedback provides orientation. Not right or wrong, but you are here. This is what's happening. This is the next step. Sequencing provides momentum. Instead of guessing what to work on next, the student follows a coherent path. This is why the first 6 and 8 weeks are so sensitive. If sequencing is wrong, the student builds confidence in the wrong direction. If sequence is right, confidence grows exactly where it needs to. Improvisation does not need endless option. It needs clear boundary that slowly expand. Too much freedom too early creates paralysis. Too much control too long creates rigidity. The threshold exists in the balance between the two, when the balance is very difficult to find alone. This is why students who receive personal feedback often experience a breakthrough much faster. Not because they are told what to play, but because they are shown how to listen to themselves in a new way. Why a long course with an early breakthrough makes sense? At first glance, a 1-year course and a 6-8 week breakthrough might seem contradictory, but in reality they belong together. The early breakthrough is not the destination, it is the permission to continue. Without it, many adults quit, not because they lack motivation, but because they never feel that improvisation is truly accessible. Once the threshold is crossed, the relationship with practice changes, because practice becomes meaningful, theory becomes contextual, technique becomes expressive. Instead of asking, why am I doing this? The student asks, how can I go deeper? The rest of the year is no longer about convincing, it's about refinement. Tone matters, phrasing deepens, rhythm stabilizes, harmony makes emotional sense, identity becomes clear. This is sustainable growth, not rushed, not superficial, not overwhelming. The early breakthrough creates trust. Trust creates patience. Patience allows mastery to develop naturally. This is why the promise of starting improvise within 8 weeks is not hype. It is a structural necessity. It ensures that the student does not spend another year waiting to feel musical. Instead, they begin feeling musical early, and then spend the year learning how to express the musicality with clarity, depth, and confidence. If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself, there is one important thing you need to hear clearly. You are not late, you are not behind, you are not incapable. You have simply never been shown how improvisation actually begins. Not with mastery, not with speed, not with perfection. The threshold is not something reserved for the gifted. It is available to anyone who enters the process in the right way. The question is not, can I improvise? The question is, am I entering the process through the right door? In the next part, we will look closely at what happens after the threshold, how confidence grows without forcing, how fear dissolves without denial, and how improvisation becomes a stable part of who you are, not a fragile skill that disappears under pressure. Why improvisation disappears for some adults and stay for others? One of the biggest fear adult saxophone players carry is not about starting improvisation, it's about losing it. They experience a breakthrough, they feel freedom, they create something real. And then, weeks later, a fear returns. The confidence weakens, the improvisation feels fragile again. This leads to a painful belief. Maybe it was just lucky, but improvisation does not disappear because it was fake. It disappears because it was not yet stabilized. There is a difference between access and integration. Access is the door opening. Integration is learning how to live inside the house. Some adult players touch improvisation briefly and then lose it because the environment does not support it. They return to isolation, they return to self-judgment, they return to structured practice, they return to control mode. And the nervous system does what it always does when uncertainty increases. It chooses safety. And safety means repetition, safety means memorization, safety means control. Improvisation cannot survive in that environment. For improvisation to stay, three things must happen after the threshold. Not immediately, gradually, naturally. Those three things are repetition without fear, reflection without judgment, and continuity without pressure. Let's explore them. Repetition without fear. Improvisation becomes stable only when the nervous system learns that exploration does not lead to punishment. Adults are conditioned to associate mistake with failure, but improvisation requires mistake as part of its language. If every imperfect phrase creates internal criticism, the brain will avoid improvisation altogether. Stability grows when repetition happens in an environment where imperfection is allowed. Not celebrated, not ignored, allowed. This allows the nervous system to relax into creativity instead of defending against it. 2. Reflection without judgment. Improvisation improves when the reflection exists without self-attack. Adults are very good at analyzing themselves, often too good, but analysis without compassion becomes sabotage. Stable improvisers learn how to observe their playing without labeling themselves as good or bad. They ask, what happened? Not what is wrong with me. This shift keeps creativity alive. Improvisation does not stabilize through intensity. It stabilizes through continuity. Short, consistent exposure to creative states is more powerful than rare moments of forced brilliance. Pressure collapses continuity. When adults feel they must always sound good, they stop experimenting. When pressure is removed, continuity becomes possible. And continuity is what transforms access into identity. These three elements are why some adults retain improvisation while others lose it. Not talent, not age, not intelligence. but environment, structure, and psychological safety. How confidence grows without forcing it. Adult confidence does not grow the way people think it does. It does not grow from positive thinking. It does not grow from hype. It does not grow from repeating affirmations. Confidence grows from evidence, small, consistent evidence that something works. After the improvisation threshold, confidence grows in a very specific way, not in leaps, in layers. At first, confidence is fragile. It exists only in certain moments, certain tempos, certain contexts. This is normal. Confidence becomes stable when the musician experiences, I can recover. Recovery is more important than success. Knowing that you can continue after something goes wrong builds far more confidence than playing something perfect. This is why students who are guided learn faster. They do not feel alone inside the learning process. They are not guessing whether they are progressing. They see it, they feel it, they hear it. Confidence emerges when uncertainty no longer feels threatening. And this is what a longer structure provides, not speed, stability. Confidence is the byproduct of safety plus repetition, not pressure plus ambition. Why community and shared process matter for adults? Adults often underestimate the power of community in musical development. They think learning is an individual journey, but improvisation is relational by nature. It is dialogue, conversation, response, listening. When adults practice alone, they carry all responsibility internally. When they learn inside a shared process, pressure disappears. They realize they are not alone. Others struggle, others hesitate, others doubt, others break through. This normalization reduces fear, and the fear reduction is essential for creativity growth. Community is not about comparison, it's about reflection. Seeing others navigate the same process helps the nervous system trust the path. Trust accelerates learning. When improvisation becomes part of who you are, there is a moment in the long-term journey where something shifts quietly. Improvisation stops being something you do, it becomes something you are. You no longer wonder if you can improvise, you simply do. Not always brilliantly, not always confidently, but honest, consistently, humanly. This is integration, and integration cannot be rushed, but it can be supported. This is why the combination of early access plus long-term structure is so powerful. It respects how adults actually learn. Not through pressure, not through hype, not through shortcuts, but through clarity, safety, and continuity. If you have followed this entire journey, there is one thing that should now feel clear. Improvisation is not a mysterious gift. This is a process. A process with phases, a process with thresholds, a process with stabilization. The final part is not about technique. It is about choice. Choosing to step into a different relationship with music. The final part, we will look at the emotional decision that separates those who remain listeners from those who become creators, and how two decisions change everything. The invisible moment where most adults turn back. There is a moment in every adult musician's journey that almost no one talks about. It's quiet, internal, invisible from the outside. It happens after frustration, after doubt, after years of trying to understand why music does not flow the way it should. This moment is not about technique. It is not about knowledge. It's not about ability. It's about choice. A choice that happens silently, often without words. Most adults reach the edge of improvisation and turn back. Not because they cannot continue, but because continuing requires a different relationship with themselves. Up to this point, music has been safe, structured, controlled, predictable. Notes are correct or incorrect. Exercise are right or wrong. Scale are measurable. Progress is visible. Improvisation changes the rule. It removes certainty, it removes protection, it removes the familiar comfort of being able to prepare everything in advance. And this is where the invisible decision appears. Do I stay where I feel safe? Or do I allow myself to be heard? This decision is not made once, it is made repeatedly, in small moments, quiet moments, moments that feel insignificant but are not. Moments like starting a phrase without knowing where it will end, allowing a note to ring longer than planned, continuing after something imperfect happens, letting silence exist instead of filling it. Each of these moments asks the same question: do I trust myself enough to continue? Most adults have spent their lives learning not to trust themselves in expressive situations. They learned to edit, to adjust, to hide, to minimize risk. Music education often reinforces this. It rewards correctness. It punishes mistake. It values precision over honesty. So when improvisation appears, it feels dangerous. Not musically, emotionally. Because improvisation is the moment where your internal world meets the outside world without a filter. This is why so many adult musicians remain close to improvisation but never fully enter it. They orbit it, study it, admire it, but do not live inside it. And the reason is not lack of skills, it is the absence of a decision. Improvisation begins when you decide that expression matters more than protection, that honesty matters more than control, that growth matters more than safety. This decision is not dramatic. It is gentle, quiet, personal, but once it is made, everything changes. Why improvisation is a life skill, not a musical trick. Improvisation is often misunderstood as a musical technique, something you add on top of other skills. But improvisation is not an add-on. This is a way of relating to uncertainty. And this is why it transforms adults far beyond music. Improvisation reaches you to respond instead to react, to listen instead to anticipate, to stay present instead of controlling outcomes. These are not musical skills, they are human skills. Adults who learn to improvise often notice change in other areas of life. They become more adaptable, more patient, more expressive, more comfortable with not knowing, because improvisation rewires the relationship between effort and trust. Instead of demanding certainty, you learn to move with probability. Instead of fearing mistakes, you learn to integrate them. This is why improvisation cannot be reduced to licks, scale, or formulas. Those are tools. Improvisation is orientation. It's a way of standing inside sound without hiding. And once someone experiences this orientation, it becomes difficult to return to purely mechanical playing, because something essential has been activated. A sense of authorship. Before improvisation, Music feels like repetition. After improvisation, music feels like authorship. You are no longer just playing music, you are contributing to it. This is why the first improvisation threshold is so important. It is the moment where music stops being external and becomes internal, where sound stops being borrowed and becomes personal. This shift cannot be undone. It may fluctuate, it may weaken, it may strengthen, but once you know what it feels like to create from inside, you cannot unknow it. Improvisation becomes a reference point, a compass, and everything else in music reorganizes around that compass. Why adults need a path, not a promise? Adults are skeptical, and they should be. They have heard promise before. Learn fast, master quickly, shortcut your way to freedom. Most of those promises fail because they ignore how adults actually learn. Adults do not need motivation. They need clarity. They do not need hype. They need structure. They do not need guarantees. They need a path that respects time, psychology, and reality. This is why the idea of starting improvising with 6 and 8 weeks only makes sense inside a longer journey. The early threshold is not the reward. It is the foundation. It answers the most important question every adult musician asks. Is this actually possible for me? And once that question is answered honestly, with experience, not words, commitment becomes natural. The rest of the year is no longer an act of faith. It is a continuation of something real. Adults do not need to be convinced. They need to experience that they are capable. That experience changes everything. Take a breath, not as a musician, as a human being, and consider this question honestly, without pressure, without judgment. How long have you been waiting to feel musical? Waiting to feel expressive, waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel free, waiting for the right moment, waiting for more knowledge, waiting for more time, waiting for more permission. Improvisation does not arrive when everything is ready. It arrives when you decide to stop waiting, not to rush, not to force, not to pretend, but to enter the process with honesty, to accepting perfection as part of growth, to allow yourself to be a beginner at something meaningful. This is the decision that separates those who remain students from those who become musicians. Not because they are better, but because they choose to participate fully. Music does not ask for brilliance, it asks for presence, it asks for courage, it asks for truth. Improvisation is simply the moment you answer that request. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but sincerely. And once you do, music stops being something you chase. It becomes something you live inside. Before you close, I want to leave you with something simple. I wrote a short ebook about my journey as a musician, not as method, not as technique, but as a human process. It is for musicians who want to grow without losing the self. If this series resonates with you, if something here felt familiar, if it put words to experience you have had but never articulated, you may find meaningful. You can download it for free at marcelocuco.com/ebook or on the description of this video. No obligation, no pressure, just a continuation of the conversation we have been having. Thank you for listening deeply. Thank you for taking your music seriously. And most of all, thank you for being willing to step closer to your own voice. Music is not finished with you, and you are not finished with music.